Today, we're gonna dive into something that can save you hours of processing time and get you better 3D Gaussian splatting results. We're gonna dive into how many images you should be using when you run your training. And a teaser, the question you really should be asking might not be how many images you need. So if you stick around, we'll jump into how many images you need for processing. And at the very end, I'm gonna give you a tip to get the best images possible from a video or a collection of images when you run your training. Let's jump into it and start learning how many images you need. So for this video, I am using this recording of a dozer that I took with a DJI drone. As you can see, it's got some really smooth imagery, lots of good detail. It was captured in 4K. And as I go along, there's parts where I kind of jump around with the camera because I'm flying manually. There I am flying. And that's a good sample to work with. Just keep in mind that when you're deciding how many images to use, this is really going to be for a specific scene that has like a known object or a room, not like a gigantic street or very large data set that you might get with a SLAM scanner. So this is really if you're going to be doing circles around an object, you're going to be doing circles around a room, and this will dial in how many images that you need. And so as you can see here, I flew several loops, and I'm going to jump into the camera poses and show you what those look like. We're going to start with just 100 images from this. So we're going to move up through the video in the number of images I use, and you can see how they affect the results. And we'll really quickly realize where that sweet spot is on this data set and most likely on every data set. Okay, so here's the camera poses from 100 images. As you can see, there's some areas where it's more sparse, specifically at the top. I think I was moving a little fast, and there's some gaps here and there where I probably didn't have very good images. And I'm gonna show you how to extract the right images where you might have a gap because you had a bunch of blurry images. But as you can see, it's kind of like multiple loops. It's hard to see the point cloud underneath this, but basically moved up through space. And I trained it using post-shot, and I got results that looked like this. So now I'm looking at the results in Super Splat 2.0. I know these words might get confusing. Super Splat is a visualizer. I used post-shot to train it, and just a little FYI, I set everything as default when I trained it. So I just said, here are the images, train everything to the, I think, 30,000 steps, and I also had it downscale to 1600K. And that's what a lot of people end up using. I find the 1600K can work pretty well, but you get these results, they don't look great. So if I look at certain angles, like right here, things look okay, but the caterpillar, things like that, where you have these fine details, things don't look great. So could I use these results at only 100 images? Sure. The processing was really fast on my machine. The camera poses took probably 16 seconds, and the processes saw it was minutes. So this is really fast results. Be good for maybe a mobile viewer, but not the best results. So now I'm going to double it and take it to 200 images to see how that affects the results. Because I figured if I have twice the images, I'll have twice the fidelity. Well, let's see what happens. Okay, so here are the results with 200 images. And things are starting to already look better. You can see over here, caterpillar is not as bad. I can actually see some of these cable runs in the more fine detailed areas. And if I get real low, I mean, this is looking really good, but as I showed you earlier in the 100 image poses, you know, I had a lot more images around this side of the caterpillar, so things look good. But if I move over here where we have like a chain, things don't look great. I can't really read welded on text here, but things don't look as good. And also notice like where you have a lot of variation as you move. So like around this where things look different quite a bit from different perspectives, it doesn't look as good. These cables, things like that. And again, this chrome bars, as I move around, it almost like jumps around. And that's probably because I just don't have enough images to get enough clarity on this scene. So like this is better, but this also didn't take a lot of time to process and might get you the results, but I feel like 200 still isn't enough images for a scene to get the best possible result. So I'm going to double this one more time to 400 images and see what that looks like. First, let's take a look at the camera poses at 400 so you can see how many more that is. So here's the camera poses at 400 images. Quite a bit different than I showed you at 100. So you got a tight spacing around this this dozer, and it's hard to see the dozer. I don't really know how to make these points bigger in reality capture, but you can see that there's just a lot more around specific areas where we had like the detail of that chain would be somewhere in this side of the model, and we had tons of photos around that. So this is looking good, and you can see I had like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops as I ascended around this. So looking really good, and that's what I'd expect, kind of this tight coverage at 400. So let's look at the results of this in Super Splat to see how the quality turned out. All right, here's the scene with 400 images. As you can see, like this caterpillar is a lot sharper. It's still got a little fuzziness to it, but pretty good. And where it says cat here, it's really clear. You're getting lots of good details around this, especially like things that are more unique. So over here, you got these cables looking a whole lot better. It's not just a bunch of spiky fuzz or whatever you want to call it. And things look way better. You even got this cool reflection on this light coming through. And if we zoom down in on this, you can see, you can read this welded on text that I was talking about. These chains look a lot better. Things are looking really good. And if I come over to this like chrome bar here, things are not jumping as much. And that's what we expect. So 400s were looking really good. But that's because, you know, if I go back to my reality capture results, you know, as I'm moving around some of these unique objects, like this end here, you're just getting a lot of different angles. And so as I move around it here, it's able to reproduce those angles really good. You know, these cables are looking great. Things look really good. So I would say this is a really good result. But again, could we double it? Could we make it 800 images, and will it look even sharper and more detailed? There's only one way to find out. I'm going to run it one more time at 800 images, and we'll see how that turns out. But before I run that, I'd like to point out that as you put more images in and you run what's called structure from motion to figure out your camera poses, it takes logarithmically longer and longer to process those results. Now, using reality capture, they typically are pretty fast. I think with 800 images, I waited a few minutes. I think it took a little over a minute for 400 images. But if I'm running Colmap, which is slower and actually more precise in some ways, it's going to take a lot longer. It took me 15 minutes on my Intel Core i9 with 24 cores running to just do the 400 images. And it took about an hour and a half to run 800 images on this really high-end workstation. So keep that in mind. It's not a GPU-driven process, and that it's gonna be slow when you get up to these 800, 1,000 images. So that alone might make you decide not to use that many. So let's jump in and look at the camera poses and see how they differ. Okay, so here's the camera poses from 800 images. As you can see, it's super tight spacing. In some areas, it's ridiculously tight. So we have lots and lots of camera coverage as we look around this model, which is great. I did notice there is a few gaps, things that look to me a little funny that the camera jumped at, but overall these look great. So is this going to translate into like even better looking results? Well, let's find out. Hey, Jonathan here. If you've gotten this far through the video and you're finding that this information is helpful, can you do me a favor and subscribe to my channel? Because that'll let me know I'm creating content people want, and I'm gonna make a lot more just like this. Anyways, back to the tutorial. So here's the results from running 800 images. And again, I use post-shot, default settings. It was always downsampled to 1600K, so you're not using the full 4K res imagery, but this is looking really good. But I'm going to point out a couple things. It's hard to tell if it looks any different. I'll have some side-by-side renderings to show you, but from some spots, it really doesn't look any better. I think what happens is you get to the point where you have diminishing returns, where more data doesn't really make things look any better. But what is shocking is some areas it looks worse. So I will compare some of these spots. Like here, you'll notice you can't read the text as well, which I thought was really interesting. And just in general, like things in some places just don't look as sharp that I was expecting to be at least the same. So this got me thinking why this could be. Why would I have less sharp details with more images? And what happened is I believe some of these images were so closely spaced, there wasn't enough parallax for structure for motion to know how far each one of these cameras have really moved. And that can lead sometimes to camera positions not being quite in the right spot. So which that will turn into this. So I think is sometimes you'll force too many images into a confined space and things will start to degrade. And I've seen this in a lot of different results. So knowing that, if I was to peg any specific number for a scene, I would say between 300 to 400 images. And why I say that is because I've done hundreds of models that have turned out great. I'm going to show a few on the screen here to show you what they look like and how many images I used. So as you can see, I use kind of roughly 300-ish images, sometimes 400, and got a lot of the same beautiful looking results. So you don't need to use 800, 1,000, 1,500 images for a scene like this. But really there's two other questions you should be asking when you're deciding the number of images, or aspects you should be thinking about as you capture the number of images. First off is, what resolution do you use? If I use less images, let's say 300 to 400 like I used here, I can use a higher resolution image and still make it fit on a GPU. So I'm going to show you the same scene, but I'm going to render the 400 images on 4K and you can see the difference. Okay, so here I am showing the scene at 400 images, but I haven't turned 4K on. So let me just turn on 4K, and it's hard to see, but things got a little sharper. So let's come over here where things look really good. And you can see it goes a little fuzzy. This is 400 images and 4K. So this text got sharper. Some of these lines around here got better. And let's jump over to where we saw this text. Again, we're looking, here's 4K and non-4K. Things just aren't quite as sharp. And it is definitely noticeable. You can see these little rivets show up here on these chords, things like that, these little fine details. And why that is because at 4K, you're preserving some pixel fidelity, some sharp details that get lost when you downsample the imagery. So if you can get away with it, I always suggest using a higher resolution image, but also again, to a point. If you're gonna be rendering 1080p 4K video or a scene at 4K, there's no reason really to be using 20 megapixel images, because then you're just going overkill because you're not even going to be able to see that difference. But 4K, if you can get away with it, if you have high resolution image stills, use that. That's great. So again, you're seeing some good details and things just go a little softer when you turn it off. So that's one aspect to think about. But when you're looking at this, you also want to think about not just the resolution and the number of images, but the capture path you take. Because if I take 400 images and I had 5 different levels of capture, I got this really great scene where I can move around. But what if I constrict that to one loop? What if I did 400 images at one loop? How does that affect it? So same number of images, but not as comprehensive of a coverage. So let's look at those results. Okay, so here's just one loop, and there's already, it's hard to get good views because there's so many floaters. And that's because I never flew a loop around here. So the whole loop is around the bottom I did. And if I don't have any imagery up here, you end up with a bunch of floaters. So I'm wondering if I take this scene and just crop it down and make it a little easier to look at. I'm gonna look at this a little bit better for you. So now I'm able to look, and as you can see, as I look down on this model, things start to like go haywire. See how when I look down, I used to be able to see all these details and I can't? That's because I only got 400 images from about this viewpoint. So look how good this looks. But the minute I move up, things fall apart. That's because 3D Gaussian splatting isn't a miracle. It can't just figure out what things look like from a completely novel viewpoint. But if I get up high, things look not as good. So looking at this top down, I took a flight path around here, but since I didn't use those images, things just don't look as good. So when you're capturing something, that's why we always say take like 1, 2, 3 levels of capture, because then you can move the camera up and down and get really good results. But if you just capture everything at one level, the minute I move outside a little bit of that viewpoint, things fall apart real quick. And so when you're thinking about how many images, you want 300, 400 at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different elevations and angles, and you'll get the best results. If I got 400, but it's just a single loop, that's like an image less than a degree of change of rotation. That's just not a lot of parallax. It'll look okay at that loop, but it won't look the best. So keep that in mind. So at the end of this, if I was to leave you with one thing, it's to take 300 to 400 images. And if you ever used Nerf Studio's data preparation pipeline, you'll notice that they only use a little over 300 images every time. And I get really good results with that because they figured that out. So if you've gotten this far, as promised, I was going to show you an easy tool to get the best images possible from your videos or images to run these results. And I use them for this, and you can see it was helpful for getting those nice 4K renders. So the tool I want to show you is called the Sharp Frames tool from Reflect. I would suggest looking at this company. They got some great technology they've been building around Gaussian splatting, but specifically this free tool is amazing. So all I do is I can choose a video or a directory of images. For this, I'm just going to use this excavator video that I showed at the start. It tells me the resolution, the duration, how many frames it is. And then you can go and start giving it some parameters. So if I want to prefix the images it extracts, you can give it a prefix and then the frame rate. So it takes like how many frames per second it's going to analyze. You can use all the frames. It's just going to take longer. But if you know you got a lot of good frames, you can leave it at 10 or 15. I've noticed I've gotten good results using 10. And then what you want the file type to be, JPEG, PNG. I'll just leave it as is, and then you can actually even short your time range because sometimes at the start of your video, you don't really have any good usable data. So for like this, I could probably chop off a few seconds, and at the end, I could probably, end it early. Let's just, to speed this up, I'm actually gonna only use, let's just say I use one loop. Let's say to here, just to show how it works. So hit save that range, and now I'm gonna extract frames, and it's gonna start pulling frames out. And this might take a few minutes. As you can see, it's going to take a couple of minutes on my computer, and we'll just wait to see the results in a second, which I'll fast forward to. Okay, so it's done running its process, and if I come down here, you're going to see a lot more data about the video frames it extracted. So it has like a batch size, so the number of frames considering each batch. So it's going to take 3 frames, and it's going to take the best frame from each third frame, and based off of how many frames you extracted, you end up with a result. So 168 frames for the amount of video I had. If I did the full video, it actually turned out to be just around 400 frames. But if I make, let's say this batch size, look at it every 2 images, then you have more images to look at. And so you can also say how much to skip between, maybe make that 0. So you might have 2 successful images in a row, which is a way to do it. And now you're starting to get up to 300 images. You might find that that's more than you need, but you can actually then come down and look at these. So you can see like these first few, I barely even moved. But over here, things get a little bit worse. I'm probably pivoting the camera and then it's moving along again. You can pull up one of these and get an idea of how they look. So just hold Z to zoom so you can really look at those details, see if they're there, and just decide how many you need. If you notice there's a bunch of images and the camera's barely moved, you probably don't need them all. But this is a good and easy way to figure it out. You can even say like, I want every certain amount of images. So give me a certain amount of frames and it'll pick it out. It says 300, but it has less than that. You can play around with that. It's because of the gap. If I made the gap 2, now it's got me 200 frames and the best 200 there. That's an easy way as well. Or top percentage, which I say this is not the best because you're going to get a bunch of them that are really close together. You don't want that. You want a lot more images or else it'll fall apart. And the last one is you could go manually select them. I don't, again, suggest this unless you really know what you're doing or have the time, because it's going to take a long time to get through all these. But let's just say you're happy. Let's say I've got these 200 images I want. You can hit download frames and it'll extract a zip with all your frames in there and make your life easy. And that is a really helpful tool. Trust me, having the sharp frames and not blurry frames can make a night and day difference in the results, because what you're doing is you're telling the Gaussian splatting workflow, here are a bunch of reference images of the scene and match the Gaussians up to appear like the images. So if you say, here are 5 or 6 blurry photos that I randomly extracted using some sort of FFmpeg extraction, you're going to be telling it, hey, from this viewpoint, it's supposed to look blurry, and that won't help you. You want it to be sharp as possible throughout the whole video. So anyways, I hope that helped. I hope this video helps. I hope you guys go out and create some fantastic scenes, and hopefully this really ends these Reddit forum questions saying, why is it taking 3 days to process my Gaussian splats? And I come to find out they're using 5,000 images. It just isn't going to work, and you're not going to necessarily get better results with that many images. So with that information, if you found this a useful video, please like and subscribe to my channel. This will help me know if I'm making the right type of content for you. I have a lot more that gets more in depth, like this one, about types of images, image capture, things like that. And if that's helpful, I suggest you guys subscribe and keep tabs on what I'm coming out with. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next video.